Senator Durbin, first to you, just since this is the first we've spoken to you, when did you hear about this incident, and what do you make of it?
Oh, I heard about it yesterday afternoon like most Americans did. And, of course, my thoughts and prayers are with Congressman Giffords and all the persons that were injured in any way. There are two things I'd say, Candy, as I've listened to your program, which has had excellent coverage. The first is we live in a world of violent images and violent words. But those of us in public life and the journalists who cover us should be thoughtful in response to this and try to bring down the rhetoric, which I'm afraid has become pervasive in our discussion of political issues. The phrase, don't retreat, reload, putting crosshairs on congressional districts as targets. These sorts of things, I think, invite the kind of toxic rhetoric that can lead unstable people to believe this is an acceptable response. And I think that we all have an obligation, both political parties, and let me salute the senior senator from Arizona, John McCain, whose statement yesterday was clear and unequivocal that we are not accepting this kind of conduct as being anywhere near the mainstream.
Senator Durbin, let me just follow up before I get to Senator Alexander, and that is when you talk about, putting those that you want to defeat in crosshairs sort of graphically, on the internet, you're talking about Sarah Palin here. And I guess that the undertow, and certainly it's not an undertow on the internet, but the undertow with politicians now speaking publicly is, well, the Republicans and the Tea Party and Sarah Palin have gone way too far in their rhetoric. It's been violent rhetoric, and therefore this sort of thing happens. Are you making that direct connection?
I don't think you could ever make that direct connection, but don't we have an obligation, those of us in public life and those who cover us, to say this is beyond the bounds. It may be constitutionally permissible, but it shouldn't be acceptable rhetoric. We shouldn't invite it on the radio talk shows or the TV, at least without comment. We ought to say that just goes too far.
And Democrats do you think Democrats are as guilty of ratcheting up?
I don't want to point those fingers other than to say that we understand how vulnerable everyone is in this culture, and those of us in public life even more vulnerable, and we owe it to our own in both political parties to have at least the good sense and common decency when people say these outrageous things to say, wait a minute, that just goes too far, whether it comes from the right or from the left.
Senator Alexander, do you take issue with anything Senator Durbin just said?
Well, I'm sorry, it was a little unfair of me.
Let me have you first respond to the incident, of course. Let me have you do that first.
Well, I was thinking, listening to your show, too, listening to the Congresswoman read the First Amendment, perhaps our most surprised amendment on the floor of the House this week, how what was happening yesterday in Tucson was exactly what the First Amendment was about, peaceable assembly and a right to petition the government. That's such a fabric of our American life that we have to continue it. And of course we want civility instead of incivility. And of course we don't want violence. But I think in all of the talk about this, we have to be very careful about imputing the motives or the actions of a deranged individual to any particular group of Americans who have their own political beliefs. I mean, what we know about this individual, for example, is that he was reading Karl Marx and reading Hitler and burning the American flag.
So I don't think, and certainly Senator Durbin can speak for himself, that he was attaching Sarah Palin's now famous crosshairs ad of those congresspeople that she wanted to see defeated. With this particular, for instance, I think that the general notion is that some of this rhetoric and the talk, and so much of our talk in politics does revolve around ammunition and guns and drawing a bead and, that kind of thing, that sort of stuff does lead to this type of thing, not this specific thing. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'm not sure, Candy. I mean, as I said, this individual, what we know about this individual is that he read Karl Marx, he read Hitler. We know he was burning the American flag. Now, that's not the profile of a typical Tea Party member, if that's the inference that's being made. I think, obviously, we're much better off in our country if we peaceably assemble, treat each other with respect, show courtesy, and condemn people who go over the line, and particularly those who do it violently, as this individual did yesterday. Of course we could. I agree that Senator McCain's comment was exactly right. We all agree with that. So I think in all of the, it's tempting to say, well, this person might have been the result of this other person's comments, but I think we need to be very, very careful.
Untying it, though, from this,
any of these actions to someone else.
Let's cut that connection then, and let me just ask you as a question separate and of itself. Is it over the line politically these days, given the kind of climate we're in, to be talking about or graphically showing a politician in the crosshairs, or talking about taking them out? Was it over the line, sort of specifically, since it's now being talked about everywhere, with Sarah Palin's web ads about people that she would like to see targeted for political defeat?
Well, Candy, I think you're responsible by bringing this up, of doing the very thing you're trying to condemn. I mean, you're making and implying a direct connection between Sarah Palin and what happened.
No, I specifically said we need to tie it away from that.
Picking out a particular incident. Well, I think the way to get away from it is for you not to be talking about it.
No, Senator Durbin did bring it up, so that's kind of why I am.
My own view of it.
Yeah, I guess I totally agree with you, Senator Alexander, that even by bringing it up, and I don't know if you've seen the web, but it is all over the web now, so it's not as though this is like some new idea that I've come up with suddenly standing here. And I think the question is, and I agree with you, that when you get into a discussion of what's over the line and what's not over the line in terms of rhetoric, that itself becomes something that incites people. But then how do you ever come to an agreement on what's acceptable political public conversation?
Well, you treat each other with courtesy. You know, on the floor of the Senate, we try to do that. We have pretty emotional issues to discuss, but we still treat each other with a lot of civility. Most of the incivility doesn't come from people who are elected to public office. It comes from other people. So I think, as Senator Durbin said earlier, we ought to cool it, tone it down, treat each other with great respect, respect each other's ideas, and even on difficult issues like immigration or taxes or health care law, do our best not to inflame passions.